There's nothing worse than spending a bunch of money in marketing dollars to get people to come to your website. And worst of all, start your form, but not complete it. They have some intent, they have some motivation, but not enough to get them through the steps to fill out your form so you guys can start a conversation. Our team was running into the same frustration. And so I took it upon myself to actually build a solution to this so that we could actually get in touch with these people that are there right on the cusp of talking to us, but haven't quite completed all the steps in order to do so. And we made sure we were going to bridge the gap so that we could speak to that person. And the way that we did that is basically a combination of tech, which I'm going to walk through here shortly. And what we do is we grab that address or even an address fragment. We look at things like the IP address of where that person is coming from in order to identify an exact address or what they were intending to input. And then from there, we actually auto skip trace that address to then find the person, phone number, and emails potentially associated with that individual. So our team can reach out, try to close the gap and see if we're able to help them in what they're looking for. So I wanted to share with you how this is possible. I'm actually going to break down the actual way that I went about solving for this so that if you're interested in doing the same thing, you could replicate this and do this for your business as well. So the way that we're going to do this, we're going to go over to a solution that I like called Make. If you're familiar with Zapier, it's very similar. But in my opinion, it's like Zapier, but on steroids, way more flexible, way more effective in terms of solving a lot of the tasks that one would want to do. And so I'm going to go ahead and log in. And what we're going to do is essentially create a new scenario and go ahead and get this thing put together. So the concept here is essentially you have a form on your website. That form collects some amount of information. And what we're going to do is make sure anybody that starts that form, best case scenario, they go to full completion and they get the form submitted and our team's reaching out. But there's some percentage that fall in between where they're only doing a partial address submit or some fragments of information, but they're not actually giving us all their contact info so that we can actually follow up. And so what we're going to do is that segment of people that don't go forward, we're going to take that information, we're going to send it through an API into what we're about to build right now. And then we're going to look at that user's IP address and the information they provided. We're going to attempt to validate that address against Google Maps to find the best possible match. We're then going to run it through a skip tracing service to then get back that information. We're going to do some level of scrubbing on that, and then we're going to return all of that information back in the API response so that you can then consume that in any way that you like. Whether you want to pull that into your CRM directly and create a lead record, or if you simply just want to run these through one by one, it can be really flexible in terms of the actual application of how this is going to be built. So the first thing that we're going to do here is actually going to be creating a webhook. And so what the webhook is going to do for us is it's going to enable us to receive a request and then take some actions. And so we're actually going to go ahead and add a new webhook. A webhook is basically just a URL, if you're not familiar with APIs and webhooks, where we're able to send data and pass data back and forth and get some level of response. I'm going to call this auto skip trace demo, and we're going to just hit save. So this actually creates a webhook URL for us that we can then start to interact with. I'm just going to hit OK for the time being. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually, in the event that this is a partial address, and say there's basically three use cases here. One is full address, full contact information. The second is full address. Good chance I don't need to actually do any other level of verification. The next best part is maybe just street address, no city, state, or zip. So I don't actually know where they're submitting the form from. But in a lot of these cases, the form data itself will have the user IP address. And in a tool like this, you can actually go ahead and look that up. So I've actually already built this service once before, so I'm gonna go ahead and just paste this in here. All this really is another API call. So what you can see here, it's calling this service API ip2location.io. It's a get method. Here you can see my key, which I will blur out. And then outside of that, you can see that it's grabbing the IP. It's gonna expect to be passed some user information, which we'll have to come back and fix. And what it's going to do is return back to us what that's going to look like. And if we can actually go to ip2location.com, I believe. This is actually a free account. I think you get a good chunk of these in advance. And here's a good example of how this works. You can actually just look at your own IP address, pop it in here, and it's going to tell you a bunch of information about your computer, where you're located. And what we're going to look to do is essentially just borrow this city and state information so that we can append it to the street only address. And then we're going to use that to then search and verify this address against Google. So let's go ahead and go on to the next step. We are going to then go to Google Maps. We're going to pass in the information, and we are just going to look for the Google Maps get location. We'll use that connection, and we will just do this. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this tab. And what we're actually going to do is go ahead and create a test scenario so that we can actually test as we're working through that particular webhook. Okay, so in order to call the endpoint, we're just going to make a basic request here. I'm going to go ahead and grab that URL. And so the reason I'm doing this is it's going to help me essentially set up the data structure that I would need to reference throughout the rest of that call. So let's go ahead and set this to raw. We'll set this to JSON, application JSON, and we're actually going to make this the request body. Let me quickly talk about what's in there. So all it's doing is it's going to say, hey, make a call to that webhook. I'm trying to get some information back from it. So I'm going to say I'm going to pass this information to it. So I'm going to say, here's the user info. We're not going to know this, right? So the use case that we care about, we're mostly, in most cases, not going to know any of this, right? That's the whole point of what we're trying to build. I want to collect these things, but I'll use the same structure because we'll later populate it with the things that we care about. We're going to say we get a full address. Here's the full address. We're also going to set it up so that it could potentially receive address fragments. So just street address, state, zip, etc. And then we're going to have it pass in a bunch of tracking information. This is also very useful if you're doing PPC and some of these other paid marketing sources. And then we're actually going to capture some of the submission info, right? So there's a form ID, there's a user IP, landing page, etc. So this is all sort of like just mock data that we're going to pass through. And what that's going to do is help me set up the data structure. We're going to hit redetermine data structure. I'm then going to go ahead and run this once. It's then going to send that data. So you should see this all in the request content down below. This is what it's passing in. And then this is just a test, so it's not going to return anything at this point in time. Now, if I go over here, you can see it successfully determined. I'm going to then go ahead and click over here, and we are going to then grab the IP address variable that we just passed into that endpoint. So for this service, we need to pass it a user IP so that we then receive back some sort of response there. What I want to do here is we can do address or coordinates. We don't have coordinates. Our best case scenario here is that we're going to get a full address, but in the event that that field is not completed, maybe we would only have some partial info here. And so what I'm going to do is actually say if empty. This is just a formula. You can actually look these up, but I'm familiar enough with this that you can just type these in. Or say if empty full address. So essentially if full address is empty, it's going to do something else. And then otherwise, it's just going to give us the full address into Google Maps, which is great. And what we're going to say is we want to then just take these parts. And more often than not, like at a minimum, I need the street address. You can then insert, let's just do insert comma. We will then say we hopefully get the city. But what we'll say is, again, we'll do if empty, and then we'll say city. Now, if that one's empty, I want to take the city that was provided from the IP address lookup. And so it looks like it gives us city name. And so we'll close that. And then what we need is city state. And so we'll do the same thing. We're going to say if empty. Again, best case, they give us a state. But if not, we'll take it from the IP address lookup. So it looks like region name. And then we'll do comma. And then we will just do, I guess they both give us zip code, so we can take both. So I'll just do if empty, and we'll take our zip code. And then if they don't provide any zip code, we will take the IP address zip code. And this should give us a pretty robust solution to making sure that we get the right info. So now we have our IP address lookup. So that's going to help for the use case where we don't get a full address, essentially address partials. We're then going to send in that address into Google Maps. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to just add in a variable. So the variable is helpful because it will just essentially allow us to decompose this response. And we're going to decompose this into something usable and repeatable. And I like this because it's a formula that we can just store in one location rather than doing multiple times. And so I'm gonna just call this, let's call this street. So let's do street, we'll do city, state, and zip. Okay, and I'm gonna copy over some formulas to parse this out, but let me actually just show you an example from this test data. Let's go ahead and grab this address right here. I'm gonna go ahead and just run this one here. Let's run this module. We're going to pass it full address. Great. So what this is going to do is going to take this in, essentially run it through, format it, standardize it, all that good stuff. And in the response, it's going to give us a breakdown of actually components. And what's nice about this is you can take the long name or short name, as you can see here, north versus N, and then each of the different sections. And so we need to re-aggregate these and store these in their own variable just to make our life a little bit easier. So we're going to go ahead and just reuse some of these components. And all we're doing is grabbing address components in a couple spots. And so let me just grab that, and then I'll show you how this actually works. And so all this is doing, it's because it comes in sort of like in a nested array, we have to map the component. We then have to get the first value that we care about. We want to get the long name, and we want to filter on type equal to street number. And then essentially, because it gives you street number and the street name, AKA route, separately, you have to actually combine them, add a space, and then do the same thing for that other component. The other pieces are a little bit easier. In this case, we're gonna grab city. City is gonna do first. We're gonna map, again, address component. So that just basically decomposes this array. We're gonna get the long name of types locality. That's going to give us our city. And then next we have state, very similar approach. And let me just show you again what this is referencing. The easiest way to run this is actually go look at the response here, and you'll see what it's actually doing. So we're grabbing long name of type route in that example. This will be the city. So we want the long name or short name, they're the same. And then we're going to do filter on type equal to locality. If we come back over here, we have state set up. And then lastly, we are going to do zip, pop that in here, fix the reference to go to here, and we'll hit OK. Okay, so that then sets the variables in a usable format. The next thing we are going to do is use a handy dandy service called batch data. I'm actually going to just copy a previously built version of this. And these are pretty straightforward as well. So these blue are just API calls. We are calling the batch data API service. We were making a post. We were passing in all this information. And essentially there, it's just going to ask us to patch in the address information. And so what we want to do then is go reference our variables that we just built. And there we have it. So we're going to pass into batch data that information. And then what we're expecting to get back is some information about that property. Let's go ahead and clean this up really quick. All right, so we're actually gonna go ahead and test this. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit run once. When it's a webhook, that just means it's now listening. It's waiting for a request. We are then going to send it a test request with that stage data I talked about before. If we come back over here and you see all these ones, which means it ran, and we can actually go look at what came through. And then here you can go ahead and see, here's the information that we were passing through. Here's our test information there, test information here, so on and so forth. And then that's all going to get processed through. What I like to do is go in and inspect each one of these. I can see we would have passed in the IP address here, and what we should return back to us is some information about that IP address. We are then going to send this to Google Maps. Google Maps is going to then respond back with something, and you can see that it responded back correctly. We are then going to set those variables into the component parts that we would care about. And then we are going to then send that into batch data to then skip trace this information for us. And if I come back here, I should get a positive response. So I see 200. Yes, that is good. And then I'm going to go ahead and look at the results. And you can see it's actually giving us back some information. I have a property address. I have a name. I have a phone number. Actually, I have several phone numbers. Looks like 3. That's awesome. And it looks like I have 2 email addresses. and then I get some further information about the property itself. So you can see so far, skip trace part is working. This is exactly what the outcome I wanted. I got a partial or maybe just an address submitted. And then I am able to then go find who that individual is, get some information on how to contact them. And now the next step is go take that information and do something with it. So let's go ahead and get on to the next step. So you'll notice in here, there's actually several phone numbers. I'm not going to get into the process to do this, but it is possible to actually retrieve this entire list. You use something called an iterator. You then log these into an array, and then you send that array back into the data. Happy to share how to do that in another video or elsewhere if there are questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep it simple. We're going to take the first phone number and email and then pass that through. What I like to do is I actually like to standardize phone numbers. It makes things clean and easy. And there's a very nice parse phone number feature in here. What we're going to do is go ahead and go to our results. I'm going to then go grab that phone number here. We're going to pass it in here. And then we are going to do United States. And then from here, what we're going to do is actually create a JSON. And so the reason we create JSON is because we want to then easily pass this information into the response of the webhook. And this will help us essentially structure the data so that things are consistent going in and out of this entire framework. And so the easiest way to do this is if you already have JSON structured, which here we do, let's go ahead and actually grab the request content here. So this is our JSON. This is the structure we actually want to return. And so as I mentioned before, we're going to send it data. All this data is not required, but then I'm going to return data. And I kept the same structure because I want to return data into the same structure. And it just makes things super clean. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do add. I'm going to call this, I don't know, auto skip demo DS. I like to call it DS for data structure. And then what's really nice is rather than just like manually building the JSON, you can actually just generate it. And you generate it by providing sample data, which we have in our sample test. So that makes it super simple. And then we'll go ahead and hit generate. And it just nicely structured everything as we would need it. And so now the input structure that I want the data to be transmitted through is here. I go ahead and hit save. And then all I need to do then is fill in the fields of the data that I want to then pass back. And so we would have gotten first name from our test here. So we'll go ahead and grab first name. We will grab last name. Did not do anything for email is next. We will do primary email only in this example. We'll do primary phone only in this example. I will go ahead and pass back the full formatted address, which Google will give to us. I will then go ahead and pass back the address parts that we would have received here. So now we have clean data when it comes to the address, which is very nice to have. I will feed through the data that came in just for continuity. So we would have gotten things like Google Click ID and maybe a Facebook ID and maybe the term. So I like to just pass these all through just so that we have continuity in the data. Again, this is all tested data. Let's leave that alone. Go ahead and pass back the user IP address. I think that's it. So the main thing we care about passing back here is essentially the name, standardized address, email, and phone. So we are going to go ahead and just hit OK. And then what we're going to do is actually add a response. So we made a call, something happens, and then we wanted to send something back to the place that I made the call. And what we're going to do for that is actually just go back to webhook. We are then going to do webhook response. And then typically this would be something like, so status 200 would be, hey, everything's A-OK, and here's the information. Typically, this is where you would input all of the details that you want to respond with. And so in our case, what we're going to do is we're just going to pass in this JSON string. We're going to hit OK, and we're going to hit save. So one thing to add on creating the webhook is that when we do a response, we actually need to tell the system on what language we're wanting data to be represented. And so the way that we do that is we say content type, and then we want to say application/JSON. And I think that's all. We'll hit OK, we'll hit save. We will hit run once. We will hit run once here, pass that data in. I will come back. Oh, I see some data came through. That's awesome. Let's look here. I see formatted phone numbers. That looks great. I see our structured JSON. That looks great. I see a 200 response. That looks great. Should have told this to parse my response. Let's see if this cleans up my response a little bit. Let's go ahead and run this again. Wait for new data. Run this now. I should get a full response. Okay, awesome. So you'll see that I told it to respond back in structured data. So now I can like cleanly look at this. And the main thing I care about is user info, right? That's what we just went to go get. We pass in some property info, and now I have back a first name, a last name, a primary email address, and a phone number to then reach back out to. Let me actually go clean that up even, because that's not even the phone number format I wanted. So let's go ahead and fix that. So primary phone, we are going to use our national format is what I want. So we go ahead and hit save. So I think with that, we're pretty much done. Essentially, all you need to do is hit this endpoint, feed it in some data. I will provide you the example JSON structure that I used here. If you want to emulate that, you of course can drop elements or fields of that. You don't need everything there. It just so happens to be what I used. And then you can actually then leverage this to integrate it into your platform using a service like Batch Data. Now, of course, a lot of these services, you'll need to go create your own accounts. You'll need to use your own API keys, which you'll have to procure on each of those given platforms. But then once you set it up, you configure the requests within this flow, and you can easily send all of those partial fragmented form leads into this, get a response back, and get your team in touch with these individuals quicker. So I hope this was helpful and you can actually apply this in your own business. If you are able to successfully put this together, I would love to hear about it. Please let me know. If you have more questions about this or other nuances about how to make this work or other ways to integrate this into your business processes, feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to have a conversation about it. Until next time.